Hi, my name is Angelina Huff, and I am a former addictions counselor who determined that there was something missing within her own healing and had to take some time off in order to be able to heal from my own burnout. And while I was doing that, I decided I would try and re-establish my own basic foundation in a different way in order to be able to better help those who I wished to help. And this is what I have determined over the last year of a self-study, a self-study in trauma trigger response control. Okay, so this is based in my understanding of how to not just put together a treatment program, but also analyze and observe the effectiveness of the repetitive consistency of the particular action. And this is based a lot in behaviorism and looking at different ways to basically reprogram the self at a subconscious level in order to be able to control unconscious reactions due to trauma. And we see this a lot in like flashbacks and unintentional violence during those moments of flashback, which is specifically what I was looking for to be able to deprogram within the client. So the foundation of my theory is based in I myself had a military career, and I ended up losing my career not necessarily because of my mental health disorders, but because of my neurological responses to my PTSD. This led to idiopathic neurological blanks in memory as well as time frames, and honestly, it came to the point of where what one would consider within the psychiatric world as dissociation became more obvious as a neurological glitch because of the trauma. And my body literally shows me exactly when those trauma activations happen. And that actually is beautifully described in the work of the book The Body Keeps the Score, which talks specifically about how the body responds to trauma. And so when I began my studying, it was in 2016 after my military career was unexpectedly ended. And so I began to observe myself because, well, when you take somebody of my caliber and my thinking process and give them absolutely nothing to observe, I tend to begin to observe self-behavior as well as environment. And so my studies, when I got into the field of psychology, began as a self-understanding of why I responded attachment-wise due to early childhood trauma and attachment disorders. So my very first paper that I wrote when I was in my undergraduate studies was particularly related to how childhood trauma and attachment disorders lead to what kind of relationship they lead to in adult life between parent and next generation of child. So I noticed that early attachment issues, when it related to trauma, not just trauma, but physical abuse, especially from a parent. It really honestly created this one of two dynamics: either a continuation of that same kind of behavior or the exact opposite. And it created a mother or parent who was so overprotective of their child, they didn't allow their child to experience anything. And so I wanted to see if there was a possibility for a third response. And so I literally began to notice how I myself responded to my children based in my own personal experiences with attachment as well as parenting. Now, this actually led to my second major paper, which was actually based in borderline personality disorder, but it was really focusing on how disorganized attachment styles lead into personality disorders. Now, personality disorders are not permanent. These are things that are literally trained into our subconscious mind, okay? And that particularly looks very chaotic within the borderline personality disorder. And so I did a lot of research in that particular area, especially relating to complex PTSD, because borderline personality disorder is often misdiagnosed in the United States because complex PTSD is not recognized by the DSM-7 at this time. However, it is recognized within the ICD-10. And therefore, I was able to do research into complex PTSD as well as borderline personality disorder at the exact same time, because my clinical director in the addictions field where I worked was actually a very renowned specialist in borderline personality disorder. And it actually ended up working out beautifully because I had always been drawn towards dialectical behavioral therapy. And borderline personality disorder, as well as complex PTSD, both respond very, very well to dialectical behavioral therapy. So this actually ended up leading me into recognizing the necessity to help to change the personality disorder, which is related to the attachment, which is related to the trauma. So this actually all unfolds into this beautiful little onion. But then we can go back to our classics, our major basic foundations of psychology, and look at Carl Jung and even Viktor Frankl and the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then, of course, at the very top of that is self-actualization. And so when we learn how to overcome the basic hierarchy of needs by fulfilling those things at a literal, like, body neurological level, then we can learn how to self-actualize even beyond trauma. So this is what we're looking at. We're not looking at trying to deal with the trauma and learn how to cope, because this is just a cycle of repeating, right? We're coping, we're not actually healing. And so this is where we need to learn how to retrain the neurological system in order to be able to create a calming bodily response, so that when the heart rate would normally spike, it actually ends up lowering so that the mind can remain calm and cool and collected, even in a moment of alarm. Okay, and this is actually beautifully looked at if you look at the response to long-term trauma. So complex PTSD is it can look like bipolar, it can look like borderline personality disorder, and it can look like just a very, very stubborn case of PTSD. Again, PTSD isn't necessarily always a chronic condition. It's usually only considerably chronic when it is complex, which, again, in the United States, they don't actually recognize that as a disorder. And so they actually call it chronic PTSD. Okay, so if you look at the response to the actual trauma, this is where you create your worldview. You can have two siblings raised in the exact same environment, but their response to that environment is what we're looking at. That's the worldview. How do they view the world based on what they experienced? Do they view it cynically, or do they view it as a way to grow? And these are the response systems that we're trying to look at, because there's the three responses that we know of: the victim mindset, the perpetrator mindset, and then this third mindset that we don't really see in the psychological world. It's not something that's really promoted, but this is what I want to do. And this is where my questions come in. Okay, so what is missing within the current treatment taught in the psychological community that is accessible to those who need it most? Deeper dives. Look, I love mindfulness as a taught psychological theory. However, it is so watered down from the original ancient understanding of mindfulness. And this is understandable because, as you can see, the unfortunate thing is that the average human no longer has the capacity to hold complex ideas. This is due to a systematic draining of our focus and attention. I just want to draw your attention to television. Think about it. You sit down for a sitcom, which is a 30-minute period of time. However, it's actually only 21 minutes of viewing with 3 systematically placed time frames of commercials that are 30 to 1 minute long. Now, imagine how many times you've split your attention just in that 30 minutes because you've had interruptions that were short and captured your attention for a short period of time. It's literally to the point of where children nowadays can't even watch a 30-second short video. My children, well, one of my children, even watches split screen videos, which I highly abhor and very often tell her that it's not a very good idea. But this is what is happening within our society. And it's not even just our entertainment that is creating this kind of interruption of focus. It's even in the school systems. Think about how different learning was even 40 years ago compared to now. It is a way of systematically allowing us to be conformed into a box, okay? But unfortunately, these boxes that we have a consistent track record of not being successful. Okay, and this is the issue that I have. You cannot tell me that insanity is not defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which is exactly why I propose we need to change something. Okay, so what can we do to remove reliance on an overtaxed system that is both natural and safe for participants? This is extremely important, and I absolutely highly recommend this. I myself created one of these simulated environments, not necessarily outside of my personal area. I created that simulated environment by breaking down my own personal patterns and creating a storyline that allowed me to be able to unpack 40 years of trauma without having a single bout of depression. That's significant because it allowed me to create a puzzle out of my trauma that allowed me to unpack it piece by piece, allowing me to see each and every lesson as it was. This particular kind of simulating of environment could be very useful for not only combat veterans who may have an overthinking issue because of being trained to be on situational awareness 100% of the time. You cannot have a brain go from 100% situational awareness all the time to absolutely nothing. Those thoughts become ruminating. Those ruminating thoughts become anxiety. Those anxious thoughts become problems, right? So if we give them a puzzle to solve based specifically on their own traumas that they have experienced, whether it be during combat or military training or even civilian life, if we're talking about someone who came from the streets, or even addiction. Giving them a puzzle to solve gives them a way to utilize their brain to reframe their own trauma, retraining them to see it not as a pain or a fear, but as a catalyst and or a lesson. This is very interesting that it actually works amazingly. I have actually tried this with several people, showing them their journey as a hero's journey. The 12 Trials of Heracles is one that I use a lot. Allowing them to face their own defects or whatever it is they dislike about themselves in a new way, framing it as a monster for them to overcome. Not an actual monster, but a monster that they have control over. Okay? This allows for them to experience it. And I'll go more into this later about how the proposed simulated environments. But it actually ends up allowing them through self-assessment and recalibration to start learning how to self-soothe, self-regulate, and to respond instead of react to trigger activations. Okay. So what can be taught through natural behavioral training using verbal cues, tonal cues, musical cues, or even visual cues? Classes. Okay, these simulated environments that I've been talking about can be done in an IOP style environment. Instead of sitting through boring lectures, they actively engage in a scenario that is simulated in the facility. This will teach them to retrain their situational awareness that they have from being on alert to aware and calm without the suffering later. Okay, the retraining of trauma allows for them to utilize the skills that they may have gained throughout whatever they were doing when they gained that trauma. Okay, for those of you who understand combat veterans, you understand you can become addicted to the adrenaline, and then that becomes an issue because there's only certain ways to get adrenaline, right? So learning how to reframe and to utilize these skills that they have in a way that's going to help them to heal themselves gives them a sense of empowerment, which is exactly why I 100% agree with self-assessments as well. Okay, let's go on to this, the solutions. Okay, so my findings have literally shown me that you can utilize specific genres based on the message of the music, the melodic tone, the frequencies within what they do, the actual natural effects that they have on the body, as well as combining that with some sort of movement and or action. I find that the parts of the body that are more sensitive because of higher concentration of nerve endings, like your feet, your hands, your lips. These things are all extremely important to be engaged when trying to retrain the nervous system, okay? When we are talking about engaging with the hands, if you are using the hands in a melodic and or temporal way that is in time with the music, this can associate movement with the music. Now, why is that important? Because psychology shows us that even just moving your position within a room can relieve anxiety. The physical movement of the body removes you from the physical space that feels suffocating in that moment. Moving of the highly nerve ending sensitive areas allows for you to basically, like, think about like petting a cat or petting a service animal. This is a very soothing movement, and our bodies are trained to calm when we pet an animal. If we are utilizing music and hand movement at the same time, this can initiate a response based on the movement of the hands and the music association. Now, this can also be seen in ancient texts when talking about hand placements during meditations, specific hand movements or positions within meditation is called a mudra. That allows you to tap into a particular energy. This is the same thing. You are using your nervous system to make a connection. Now, you can look at energy as an actual physical element, or you can look at energy as a way of connecting the body to the physical reactions. If we look at cognitive behavioral therapy, it teaches us that there is a thought, which leads to a trigger, which leads to a response. Now, there's a whole bunch more that goes into that, but that's just the simplified version of that, okay? So we have a connection between the music and the movement of the hands. And if you teach your body that the particular ways that I move my hands are ways that I can calm myself, it becomes a natural self-soothing action, okay? Now, these two at the bottom here are what are extremely important. Like I said, this is why I 100% recommend self-assessment. The only way that you can determine the success of a client is through the client's self-assessment. The program success is seen through consistent correlated response to a particular trigger and or system of reprogramming or recalibration, okay? But the only one that can determine success is the client themselves, because they are the ones that have to take the action for change. So if you put into that a self-assessment, how do you feel you are doing? Not a bubble sheet thing where they can just, Christmas tree it or whatever, but an actual every 28 days, I am going to give a verbal response on what I worked on, what I felt, what I changed, how it worked, etc. Giving an actual self-assessment on what they saw in their own life allows them to be able to either see the change or recognize this next one where the self-recalibration is necessary. Self-recalibration is absolutely what we want. We don't want the reliant client. We have an overly burdened system. They're not getting the help they need because they're not learning how to help themselves. So when they learn how to recalibrate and stop trying to deal and really try and focus on healing, taking on the responsibility of their own healing through self-assessment and self-recalibration, okay? Now, this works really well if we do this in the simulated environment journey, okay? So I absolutely have no idea how to create a video game. This is something that I wouldn't be able to do in my own personal way, right? So, but allowing them to create a video game and or story that they themselves then play out while listening to a particular genre of music allows them to be able to conquer their own demons through this video game, right? And again, we're looking at controls in the hands. The more complex movements necessary, the more combo moves that you need, the better, because it requires more focus and attention. And the more we attract attention to the nerve endings, the more we can reprogram that nervous response system. Okay. Now, these simulated actual environments, like those IOP settings I was talking about, I also recommend the possibility of using apartment complexes as a larger simulated environment in order for them to be able to retransition into civilian life if maybe they've been, for lack of a better understanding, a lifer in a very hardcore core, then this could be a transition program for them to be able to learn to not only transition out of this kind of mindset, but also to be able to pay it forward and help other veterans and survivors of trauma. Okay, so these stage settings allow for improvised practice, okay? Now, everything would be done within cues, which is what I was talking about earlier. Particular numbers and letter codings in order for them to be able to, again, create this kind of puzzle. The more complicated the puzzle, which encryption is actually fairly simple. If you actually encrypt the puzzle that they have to break out in their own mind, it allows them to get through the trauma in a slowed, progressive way so that they don't explode at the end. It leads to now I understand why I wanted to go through this kind of thing. That alleviates the feeling of any kind of betrayal or anger that may have occurred without the ability to create this simulated environment. For example, if a individual is having issues with continued fighting within a bar setting because of being triggered by, say, a look somebody gave them, then one of these kinds of simulated environments could teach them how to be able to decode the signals of the eye and to recognize when it's an actual threat or just something to ignore as somebody who's trying to puff up. You know what I mean? Okay, so the like I said, the 12 triads of Heracles is an exciting way for them to recreate their fears and to solve those fears by facing them head on. Now, this is also something that I also look into from a spiritual perspective, utilizing older ancient healing techniques through learning the 13 sidereal constellation a birth chart reading. Okay, that shows a deeper spiritual connection to healing and evolving on the spiritual journey. So I do that as well using an archetypal kind of understanding. And this is basically the same thing, but this looks more for me for like combat vets, which is pretty much the reason why I started doing this in the first place. But it would also be very beneficial, like for somebody that was looking for something that wasn't quite so like video game oriented, doing something that's more spiritually based. And I highly suggest, finding people that are really talented at that and being able to reach at a spiritual level, because we do need, the spiritual aspect of this as well, and bringing in more ancient healing techniques that may have been watered down throughout the last 50 years. I mean, if you look at Carl Jung's stuff and Viktor Frankl's stuff, I mean, really honestly, it's more like philosophy than it is what modern psychology would look like, and really honestly, modern psychiatry. But these were like the basic foundations of the psychological world. And so when you look at what they taught back then compared to what we use now for healing, there's a huge disconnect. And so I highly recommend, if you have not so far read The Body Keeps the Score, and you deal in any kind of trauma informed healing, I highly recommend that. Now, this is like 100%, like I haven't the slightest idea how long this kind of program would take, because it is, again, solely based on the client's own personal ability and how quickly they take to the program. So I've been doing this myself for the last 4 months, and I have found that it is actually quite interesting to be able to unfold it this way. There have been some issues that I've had along the way, but those were outside influences that I'm not really worried about. So I would say that the 28-day cycle that I have proposed is for the self-assessment, as I've already spoken about, allows for an every 4-week recalibration. Now, if the client is serious and they make it through even 3 months, 3 months is probably plenty for beginning the kind of program, because again, this is a level based on levels. Okay, so I see this as a spiral. Okay, and I've talked about this before. When we continue to hit the same thing over and over and over again on the same flat track, we don't get anywhere. So I've created this 3-level system in order to be able to look at the same situation from 3 totally different perspectives, hopefully higher from the perspective than before. So the very first one would be level 1, and that's rewriting the narrative. So radical acceptance is a theory, not a theory, but it is a practice within psychology that I really honestly, I love the theory of it. However, it is not accepted at all by the client, which is exactly who needs to accept it, not the therapist. The therapist doesn't need to say radical acceptance is what you need because they know the truth, but the client themselves are the ones that have to accept. And that's not something that's easy for the client. I know every single one of you has gone through the same exact thing, this circular loop of you just got to accept it. That's just what we got to do. So the reason why this is a major roadblock is for, the fairness of it. It's almost always, it's just not fair. Okay. So this allows them to rewrite their own story by making them the hero for overcoming the trauma. Not for going through the trauma, but for overcoming the trauma. Now, it's not just overcoming the trauma, but the monster that the trauma could have turned them into. Now, I want to explicitly state this. I know what it's like to come to and be in a position where I was like, oh my gosh, I totally did not mean to do that. I blacked out. And then to try to explain to someone who's never experienced that what it's like, they look at you as though you're a ticking time bomb, especially if there's any kind of violence involved. And so when we continue to hear the same narrative over and over again, that you're a violent monster, you're a violent monster, you're a violent monster, this is something that becomes what? a voice inside of their head. You're a monster, you're a monster, you're a monster. So giving them a way to rewrite that narrative that I overcame that monster that was growing inside of me, then this allows them to take that hero journey to a whole new level. Okay, so then level 2 is the reprogramming. And this is where they choose how they wish to respond to their understanding. Okay, so the whole thing is like, okay, so let me give you a perfect example. A survivor guilt theory, okay, or not theory, but a situation. You have a combat vet who was the only survivor, and this is very hard for them to deal with. The constant, why was I the one that survived? How can I not save them? This is absolutely a response that comes into play into their mind over and over and over again. So allowing them to respond in a different way, giving them an option to say, I survived so I could live. I survived so I could tell their story. I survived so I could give those men life. I survived for them. And then take that, I survived for them, and then reframe that again and start allowing them to reprogram that I survived so that I could be the one to be surviving. I survived so I could be the one to help others survive. I survived so I could tell my story, right? It's no longer a why did I survive? Why am I the only one? Why? They have the answer. Okay. And they chose that answer through their own choice of reprogramming. Now, as they go through these simulated improv environments, and they have these opportunities to face these simulated environments, like, for example, again, the hair trigger when it comes to like the look, right? Reprogramming that hair trigger to recognize, that guy sees me as a threat. Okay, I'm not a threat. He can see me as a threat. If he tries to make me a threat, I'm going to walk away, right? You've already had 5 seconds and you've gone from hair trigger to recognizing that that's not a threat. And you've reprogrammed that understanding by, instead of seeing it as that man's aggressive, it's that man has a problem with me because he feels inferior to me. Okay, it's not about puffing one's ego, but about recognizing that fear breeds fear. Aggression is bred from fear, right? And I don't want to argue that point because that's an obvious point, right? Aggression is bred from fear. Okay, so also the self-recalibration and the self-assessment right there, that gives them the power to say, I have control over self, which is empowering for a person who has flashbacks, okay? So this is my absolute hypothesis that utilizing techniques taken from behaviorism while combined with the ancient teachings of mindfulness, bodily control, and bodily control through breath work, meditation, focus control, and stillness are all practices that achieve actualization, which is also known as enlightenment. So, and then adding in a creative way to incorporate healing, I propose that one can reprogram their own nervous system's trauma response reaction. Okay, and I stand firm in this belief. I have seen it work with people even before I walked away from being a therapist. And the reason why I ended up walking away from being a therapist is because of the fact that ethics doesn't allow me to teach the way that I prefer to teach, and that is through self-disclosure. I am the type of person that prefers to say, hey, I don't just preach this, I practice it. And that's not ethical within the psychological world, which is why I stepped out of the psychological world and into the world of, well, multiple healing modalities. So these are my proposed environments. The quieter the better. The more open and serene the better. But this is like I talked about before. Like that, you have a secluded isolation environment. You allow people to have their own space so that they can decompress naturally. If they have feelings of anger, they have the ability to go off somewhere where it's quiet. They can cry without judgment from the trees. They can scream, and they can, do whatever they need to do, right? That allows them to have that explosive period that they may go through directly after the incident, okay? And this allows for them to be able to experience those emotions without the feeling of fear that they might hurt somebody. Okay. And then as this allows for their own personal growth. And then, of course, having a facility where there is what I would call a trainer nearby that would be able to respond and appropriately and help this person be able to get through whatever they're going through in the moment, allows for connection as well as secluded isolation. I would highly recommend at least weekly, like, group check-ins, at least. But in this particular type of facility, this would be more of a personal, like, experience. Like, you have one person that's helping you through this, and then moving on to the suburban / semi-rural kind of environment where it's a little bit more open. Like I said, apartment complexes would be perfect for this. And then allowing for them to practice their their improvisations in the simulated environment using an IOP kind of setting. Of course, the secluded isolation would also have like an IOP kind of setting as well, where they'd be able to practice voluntarily. That would be more of a, if you wish to participate, because we understand you're going through really something very difficult right now. So self-paced healing is important. There's no time frame for this, right? So we can't necessarily predict how a person is going to respond to the exact same environment and or incident. So allowing for self-paced self-assessment, that kind of thing, allows them to feel like they're in control as well. So why do I believe this will work? Pavlov, period. We know behavior modification works. We know it. It's been something we've known for many years, and we use it in so many different ways, some for good, some not so good. But, we know how to use behavioral modification. Second, the self-assessment. I really, truly believe that making them feel like they are fully responsible for their own success really makes a difference. I tell people all the time, I'm not here to heal you. I'm here to help you heal you. I'm here to teach you the way to heal yourself, because I can't. I can't tell you what's going to work for you. All I can do is show you what is working. And then you make the choice to do that, right? And then the self-reliance. This is so important, guys. We are talking about such an overtaxed system. We've been waiting 2 years for a neurological study. It's an overtaxed system. More reliance leads to more clients. More clients that are self-reliant leads to the ability to help those who have the more stubborn cases that are a little bit harder to reach, those with the abnormal psychology that we need to do more research into to figure out how to unlock, instead of just using medication as a Band-Aid. We're not healing them, and this is an issue, right? We're just calling them crazy and putting them in facilities. That's not okay. They deserve to be free too, and they deserve healing. So, thank you so very much for watching this video. I honestly hope you guys have a fabulous day, and I'll see you soon. Bye now.